Throughout the process of our research, we got to know the stories of quite a few pretty exceptional Brazilian students. One of these is Débora Freitas. She wanted to be an architect her entire life and took the entrance exam for university, she says, over a dozen times, and I believe her because it is that hard. She never got to be an architect. Today she's studying history at the university we worked with. Rodrigo Monteiro never read a book his entire life, a full book. He read parts of one, but he truly believed his entire life that reading books was what would get him out of the favela that he grew up in. And today he's actually studying literature, and the first book he ever finished was at university. This is Gabi Souza. Her father is a baker, and her mother was actually never around, and her father sacrificed everything he could to get her into a good primary and secondary school because that's the only way that you can really get to university. And he believed with everything he had that her going to university was the only way that she would get out of her favela as well.
And while each of these stories are extraordinary, by the end of this talk, I hope you'll see that they're not particularly unique in this area. So the way that those stories come about is that, first of all, there's not really such thing as a good public school education in Brazil. If you don't go to private school, then your chances of being a well-prepared student are slim to none. And then you get to the NM, which is it's a test similar to the ACT, SAT, or GRE in Brazil. And so while the website says that the goal of the NM is to evaluate student performance, what it generally has done in practice is evaluate student income. So if you do not do well on this test, it's primarily because you went to public school. And then once you do, the test is on a scale. So let's say you pass, but you don't do as well as you would like, you don't get the course that you want. So you get whatever your score kind of fits for you. And so that usually leads to, that's how you have an architect who is now studying history. And then getting through university, I'll talk about later when we talk about futures for this Basque Connections group.
So this research is actually done in Brazil. We spent 3 weeks there last summer in the Baixada, which is, if you see Rio de Janeiro right there, it's the periphery of it. And in Brazil, that's the way that really income is structured. The richer people live in the centers of universities, and poorer people live on the peripheries. And we worked there in the Baixada with the Federal Rural University of Rio de Janeiro, specifically with the Multidisciplinary Institute, which was created to cater to these students in these areas that don't have access to federal universities within the city because they simply don't live there.
Okay, in this graphic, what I really want you to focus on is the majority of students they have a family income of less than 12,000 US dollars. And then another really important part I want you to look at is the gold. And so think of this as like the elite in the school, like the people who are making the most money, and even still, that's just over 20,000 US dollars. And for comparative purposes, I want to show you Duke University's family median income. And in honesty, we all know Duke is an elite institution. So then even if you look at Winston-Salem, which has a similar class and racial makeup, it's still more than double the income of the university in Brazil that we're talking about.
And so the work that we did with this university last summer, we spent 3 weeks there. All of the work was in Portuguese. There was a requirement that the students that went to the summer there spoke Portuguese. We learned anthropological methods and took field notes there and learned how to actually collect this data. We took over 50 interviews, recorded them and transcribed them, and through this process we also created actually a full-length film, which you can see in the back after all of these talks. And we personally experienced this juxtaposition between the richest of Rio de Janeiro and the poorest of the Baixada. And all within this very tense political atmosphere following the impeachment of Dilma Rousseff, the president, and Lava Jato, which was a big scandal of corruption where basically the majority of government personnel in Brazil had laundered a lot of money and siphoned money.
And going into the summer, we feel like we have an idea kind of how hard it is, but we haven't done much to impact, changing that. And so we think that comes from like a holistic kind of like, what do you go through socially, politically, at home, things like that, and how can we work with universities in the area and the government to kind of remedy some of all these disparities. And that is our presentation. This is our team. We have a bunch of great undergrads and graduate students that have been helping us out. And thank you for listening.
Thank you.